Hello, and welcome to your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Services Rochester Area Podcast. My name is Jan Heineman, and today I'll be reading to you from the Rochester Beacon. Our first story from the Rochester Beacon today comes from writers David Wazana and Narm Nathan and is dated June 10th. Cities Our Future Fund initiative underway. Rochester has launched Our Future Fund, a pilot program that opens a savings account for every child entering kindergarten and aims to build financial literacy among them for the next 13 years. Residents enrolled in kindergarten for the 2025 to 2026 school year, or who will be enrolled this fall, are eligible to participate in the pilot. Each participant will receive a $20 seed deposit in a savings account, with an additional $20 for children living in the city's poorest zip codes, 14605, 14608, 14611, and 14621. During the participatory period, children are eligible to earn additional deposits by opening a library card or attending a community event and other activities. Families will also be connected to resources that can empower them in reaching their financial goals, including free financial counseling and tax preparation services, affordable banking options, and first-time homebuyer grants. Funds are accessible only after a student has graduated high school or obtained a GED, and are restricted to post-secondary education, workforce training, or asset building. A student who does not graduate or obtain a GED will see their grant money returned to the program. They would still be able to withdraw any money their family put into the account. The initiative is designed to help children and their families begin to build toward future educational, career, and financial goals through savings and financial education. Research shows that a child with a designated savings account from $1 to $499 is over 4.5 times more likely to graduate from college than a child with no savings account. By creating an account for every Rochester student beginning in kindergarten, we are planting a seed of economic opportunity at the very start of a child's educational journey. That's from City Council President Miguel Melendez. Over time, he says, that seed will grow alongside each student, reinforcing the message that their dreams matter, their futures matter, and Rochester is invested in their success. When these students graduate, they will not only have a diploma, they will have access to resources that can help them take the next step. There are 2,400 kindergartners citywide. The program aims to eventually enroll all children so that in 13 years, it will have established savings accounts for Rochester's children from kindergarten through 12th grade. The city received a $244,000 donation from ESL Federal Credit Union in 2023 to support the creation of savings account and to partly fund the program's seed deposits. Canandaigua National Bank donated $50,000 in August, which will cover operational expenses for the first year of the program. John Paul Perez, ESL's Director of Community Impact, says the seed deposits for approximately 1,300 kindergartners represent more than just dollars sitting in an account. They represent opportunity, economic mobility, and an investment in the next generation. Malik Evans, mayor of Rochester, says, think about that person that's getting ready to go into kindergarten. Think about them and think about what we want them to be when they're 17 or 18. I know that seems like it's far away, but that's what this investment is all about, sowing those seeds for the future. At the announcement of the pilot program, Evans drew on his own experience with a childhood savings account. I am decent with money, he said, because I started understanding it at a very, very early age. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writers David Wazana and Narm Nathan. David Wazana is a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's second cohort. Narm Nathan is a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's inaugural cohort. The Oasis Project is the Rochester Beacon's internship program. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon tells us about an event that's coming up probably before you hear this announcement, but the topic of the event is worth listening to. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from Kayla Gulage and is dated June 11th. Cornelius Eady returns home for a poetry fest. Rochester native Cornelius Eady has returned home this week to headline the third annual Flower City Poetry Festival. It's fun to come back and read for my hometown, says Eady. He's one of several artists who've been at the Highland Bowl's outdoor amphitheater in the evening this week. That's the week of June 15th. Poets from diverse backgrounds have come together to express, represent, and celebrate their communities and experiences. Other notable artists include Youth Poetry Contest winners Kimiko Han, Amanda Eke, and Ties, a duo featuring voice and cello. Over his 46-year career, Eady has received many awards, including the Academy of American Poets Wallace Stevens Award in 2025. His 2001 collection, Brutal Imagination, was a finalist for the National Book Award. Most recently, he had the honor of reading a poem titled Proof at New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's inauguration. The title and poem acknowledges those unseen people who laid the groundwork for the city's first Muslim mayor to take office. Eady says, for the people who never thought this could happen, and now it has happened, and they are now in the front of the room. Eady grew up in the Cornhill neighborhood in the 1960s, and as a young man was more interested in music than poetry. The popularity of rock and roll and jazz caused him to want to be a musician and songwriter. However, as a senior at John Marshall High School, Eady was encouraged by one of his teachers, Josen Mason, to consider poetry. Inspired by the writers and poets he encountered, Eady explored a variety of poetic styles and traditions. Among his influences were Rochester poet Bobby Johnson, jazz poetry, and later Spanish poetry. Eady notes, as a baby poet, I wouldn't have thought this could happen as an inner-city kid. In Eady's view, poetry is responsible for community, and a poet's responsibility is to represent their community, especially when giving voice to social movements such as the Civil Rights Movement. Eady's poem, A Small Moment, shares this sentiment with the impactful verse, some days I feel my duty, some days I love my work. Where you stood as a poet, your voice was important, Eady says. Poetry during that time was important for Black culture to reclaim itself and create a space to talk about experience. Eady's works of poetry are rooted in his experience in Rochester and will always have a connection to the city. In 1996, he co-founded the Cave Canem Foundation, a literary organization committed to growing Black poets professionally and artistically through fellowships, prizes, and workshops. Looking back, Edie sees a staggering difference from the foundation's early days to now. Historically, he says, Black poets have fought to open the doors of future artists, poets, and expression for their community, so future poets do not have to squeeze through a narrow corridor to be seen and heard. Edie's advice to aspiring artists, especially those in Rochester, where they can feel isolated from the rest of the world, is persist. It's important you know your voice is important and your voice is allowed. Sometimes you don't feel the power of your writing and creating. People want to hear. The Flower City Poetry Festival, presented by Writers and Books and the Highland Park Conservatory, is continuing through Friday evening, which would be June 19th, when Edie will read from his work. The festival has been made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with support from the Governor's Office and the state legislature. As I said before, you're probably hearing this after Mr. Edie has done his reading at Highland Park, but hearing about Mr. Edie is worth it, I think. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from Kayla Gulage, a student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, who's a member of the Oasis Project's third cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated June 12th. Rochester joins effort to raise naloxone awareness. Rochester, last week, joined cities across the country in raising awareness for naloxone, an opioid antagonist. City Hall, the Riverside Convention Center, and Legacy Tower, among other buildings, were lit in purple to honor National Naloxone Awareness Day. NNAD was launched in 2023 by Victoria's Voice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to drug awareness and prevention and reducing overdose deaths. Victoria's Voice was founded by Jackie and David Siegel in memory of their daughter, Victoria, who passed away due to an accidental drug overdose in 2015 when she was 18. Naloxone, better known by its brand name Narcan, is a medication used to reverse the effects of opioid overdoses. Narcan is often a part of emergency opioid reversal kits, and in addition to being administered by first responders, is often distributed to opioid drug users and community members as a part of harm reduction efforts to reduce overdose fatalities. Courtney Clay, a community advocate for harm reduction, says, Narcan gives people who are just out for a walk and could feel helpless a way of feeling helpful. Narcan wasn't everywhere 5 years ago. People just don't know what to do. Even if we call 911, we don't know what's going to happen, and it takes them long to get there. Somebody could potentially pass away. So I do think that giving people the autonomy and a feeling of how they can help the situation has just calmed everybody down. Harm reduction programs aim to mitigate the negative social, economic, and health effects of drug use and addiction through education and the distribution of materials for overdose prevention and treatment, like Narcan and fentanyl test strips. In some cases, harm reduction programs will also provide drug users with medical care and supplies for safe drug use, such as clean needles and saline solution to prevent the spread of diseases like HIV/AIDS and hepatitis. Harm reduction efforts, like the distribution of Narcan, have been credited for the declining rate of opioid overdose deaths countrywide. However, harm reduction has faced criticism for enabling drug users and creating the perception that drugs can be used safely. Advocates have pointed to the success of such programs in mitigating the impact of the opioid epidemic. They argue that the criminalization of drugs fails to address the root causes and impacts of addiction, namely poverty and lack of education. Clay observes, harm reduction is not just for the person experiencing the trauma, it's for the community as well. Nobody wants to wake up and be on their way to work and have to know that they couldn't help someone maybe survive. Nobody wants to see, balloons where someone passed away. That's just harmful to the community. So I do think that Narcan is saving the community at large, as well as the individual drug user. Rochester's Neighborhood Ambassador program, a city-funded, community-driven program, seeks to address the opioid epidemic by recruiting and training neighborhood ambassadors in opioid crisis interventions. NAP also distributes naloxone kits, which contain naloxone nasal sprays and strips to test for fentanyl and xylazine. According to preliminary data from the Centers for Disease Control, 2025 saw an almost 14% decrease in overdose deaths. New York, along with Rhode Island, North Carolina, Alabama, and Vermont, saw the largest decline, with 25% fewer overdose deaths in 2025 than in 2024. Data from the CDC includes opioid overdose deaths, which made up over half of all overdose deaths in the United States last year. Narcan is only effective at reversing overdoses from opioids like heroin or fentanyl and does not treat overdoses resulting from other drugs such as methamphetamine or cocaine. In Monroe County, opioid-related overdose deaths dropped from 433 in 2023 to 216 in 2024, a decline of 50%, according to recent data from the County Medical Examiner. The decline mirrors a national trend, which researchers and advocates like Clay attribute to harm reduction efforts and increased access to naloxone, as well as a growing awareness of the dangers of opioid use. In 2023, at the height of the nationwide opioid epidemic, opioid overdose deaths peaked at 79,000 before beginning a steep decline, which has continued since then. Monroe County's Department of Public Health offers addiction services and information on opioid use, prevention, and recovery on its website. Visitors can also find information on where to receive free Narcan and opioid overdose reversal training. And that Monroe County information is available at monroecounty.gov. Look for the Department of Public Health, and you'll see the Addiction Services link. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana, who is a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's second cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Now, today, we've already heard from some of the new Rochester Beacon Oasis Project writers. Smriti Jacob writes here on June 15th about the new Beacon Oasis Project for this year. Last year, when David Wazana left Rochester, I was wistful, writes Smriti Jacob. At Ithaca College, he was a student from Los Angeles, and he spent last summer here as a member of the Oasis Project's second cohort. He believed you have to live in a community to report on it, so he found an apartment in the 19th Ward and spent 3 months slowly learning Rochester. Saying goodbye as he readied to drive cross-country to LA was tough. It will be the same with this year's cohort. The Beacon formalized the Oasis Project 3 years ago, growing out of my experiences teaching at the University of Rochester and St. John Fisher University. The idea? To counter the growth of news deserts by helping foster a new generation of journalists. Young people care about community and see journalism as a way to express that. And the Oasis Project is where I get to witness that firsthand. Running it is one of the most joyful parts of my year, watching eager writers find their footing and seeing former cohort members turn around and share what they've learned. In total, 16 students have participated in the Oasis Project, including those who came before the program was formalized. Nearly 40 have had work published in the Beacon. Being an incubator for young writers is a point of pride. Beacon board member Allison Frisch, who teaches at Ithaca College, serves as a mentor to the cohort. And you, our readers, have supported this program from the start. Your Community News Fund donations go directly toward paying these writers for their work. We're grateful, and you can donate to help the program at beaconcommunitynewsfund.betterworld.org. This year, contributing writers Jacob Schermerhorn, one of the Beacon's first summer interns, and Narm Nathan, a member of the inaugural cohort, are guiding the newest class, sharing what they know about the community and the craft. And David Wazana, he came back. He's decided to put down roots in Rochester for a while, reporting for the Beacon and serving as a sounding board for the third cohort, just as Narm once did for him. Alex Hawley, who was in David's cohort, is also back and will be covering the Rochester Jazz Fest, just like they did last year. Meet the Oasis Project's third cohort. We have Audra Fitzgerald from Ithaca College. Her degree there is a BS in Advertising, Public Relations, and Marketing Communications. She's from Boston. Then we have Kayla Gulage, who is a student at Rochester Institute of Technology for a degree, a BS in Journalism and English. She's from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Then we have Aiko Levick from RIT in the Communication Political Science programs and also working on a master's in communication. She's from Milwaukee. Then there's Brody Martin from Nazareth University for a BA in Communications and Mass Media, whose home is Ontario. Then Danik Sudakov from RIT for an MS in Criminal Justice, and Danik is from Riverside, California. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from managing editor Smriti Jacob, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon is a guest opinion coming from Joseph Klein and Kent Gardner. Joseph Klein is a former CEO of Klein Steel Service and a vocal education advocate. Throughout his career, Klein has been deeply committed to improving K-12 education, particularly in the Rochester City School District. He played a key role in the recruitment of Uncommon Schools affiliated True North Rochester Preparatory Charter School, which welcomed its first students for the 2006-07 school year. Uncommon Schools, charter schools, currently enrolls over 3,000 students in 7 schools. While still running Klein's deal, Klein enrolled in the Harvard School of Education, graduating with an MA in Education Policy and Management in 2011. In 2013, Klein helped establish E3 Rochester, which was committed to recruiting high-achieving charter management organizations to the city. Our co-author, Kent Gardner, served as chief economist for the Center of Governmental Research for more than 30 years, including a period as president. One of the founders of the Rochester Beacon, Gardner comments on matters of public policy and economics for the Beacon and coordinates opinion submissions to the Beacon. He earned a PhD in economics at the University of Wisconsin in 1983. And Messrs. Klein and Gardner submit their guest opinion to the Beacon, Charter Schools' Contribution to Rochester's School Children. And this letter to the editor is dated June 15th. In April, the Rochester Beacon presented a conversation with Eric Rosser, an online interview with the superintendent of the Rochester Central School District. We were disappointed to learn that Rosser is unaware of the tremendous contribution charter schools make to the educational achievement of New York and City of Rochester students. Approved by the state legislature, charter schools are public schools that are not under the authority of local boards of education. They may not charge tuition and must accept all applicants. If oversubscribed, existing spaces are allocated by lottery. In Rochester, charters can be authorized and are supervised by either the State Board of Regents or the State University Charter Schools Institute. In the interview, Rosser acknowledged that there are charters that are doing an outstanding job, as many of our schools and our district are doing an outstanding job of meeting the needs of children. And there are charters in our community that are not doing an outstanding job, as many of our schools struggle to do an outstanding job. SUNY authorized charter schools. Rosser went on to single out SUNY authorized charter schools, asserting that they, he says, create the greatest challenges when it comes to student performance, and that those who have been authorized by SUNY are, in my opinion, the weakest. His opinion notwithstanding, here are the facts as reported by the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, based on statistics compiled and posted by the State Education Department. First, 84% of SUNY authorized charter schools outperformed their local district in English, and 83% outperformed their local district in math. 7 SUNY-authorized public charter schools scored in the top 25 public schools statewide. 15 scored in the top 25 in mathematics. As for Rochester's charter schools, there are 14 charter schools in Rochester, 6 authorized by the Board of Regents and 8 by SUNY. Total enrollment in charters was reported to be 7,851 in the 2024 to 25 school year. 28% of all public school students residing in the Rochester City School District. Traditional public school students totaled 19,768. 3 charter schools, Discovery, Young Women's Prep, and Renaissance Academy, are located in the Greece Central School District. Given their location, Greece students are given priority in the charter school lottery, although the schools draw many students from Rochester. These 3 schools enrolled 1,156 students in the 24 to 25 school year. This post focuses on the Rochester-based schools, however. Rosser is apparently unaware that proficiency among Rochester charter school students was substantially higher than that shown by students attending traditional Rochester public schools. The 2025 grades 3 to 8 English language arts and math tests show that charter school students led the traditional school RCSD average by 15 percentage points on the ELA and by 16 percentage points in math. That's the writer's analysis of New York State education data. The statewide average was substantially higher than either, but this is to be expected, as 87% of Rochester's charter school students and 91% of students enrolled in traditional Rochester public schools are economically disadvantaged, versus 60% of all New York public school students. It has long been recognized that academic achievement is positively correlated with income. Rosser's conclusion that SUNY authorized charters are, quote, the weakest, is based on his belief that SUNY's process of approving applications falls short of Board of Regents standards, and that SUNY authorized schools are not held accountable. Neither belief fits the SUNY authorized schools in Rosser's own district. The SUNY chartered schools in Rochester outperform both the traditional public schools under his administration and the Rochester charter schools authorized by the Board of Regents. ELA scores for Rochester's SUNY authorized schools lead the Regents authorized schools by 7 percentage points, and their traditional public schools by 16 percentage points. The performance gaps for math are 14% and 23%, respectively. To be authorized as a SUNY charter, the schools agree to be held to high standards on community engagement, rigorous learning assessments, student leadership and success, and fiscal soundness. SUNY shut down 5 charter schools in Rochester where schools have not performed adequately. Strong student achievement in Rochester's SUNY authorized charters is testimony to the power of accountability. The same pattern applies to all charter schools statewide. Of the 4 charter authorizers in New York, the Board of Regents, SUNY, the New York City Board of Education, and the Buffalo Board of Education, students in SUNY authorized schools scored highest on the grade 3 to 8 ELA and math tests. Charter schools Rochester contribution. The continued growth of charter school enrollment is surely related to the fact that of the 10 highest achieving public schools in Rochester, which is defined as the sum of English language arts and math proficiency, 8 are charters, 6 authorized by SUNY. Of the traditional public schools, School of the Arts ranks 3rd, Schools 23 and 15 rank 7th and 9th, respectively. As 2 of the schools in the top 10 were tied, 11 are included. In the Beacon interview, Rosser stated, "We should be actually looking at ways in which we can make greater investments in public education." The writers here say, "We agree. We hope that an objective review of the facts will persuade Rosser to support expansion of the most effective public schools in his district and withdraw his suggestion that a moratorium be placed on new SUNY-authorized charters." This letter to the editor of the Rochester Beacon came from Joe Klein and Kent Gardner. And you too can write to the Beacon with your opinions by using your full and real name in an email to letters@rochesterbeacon.com. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from David Wazana and is dated June 16th. Charlotte Street developer hopes to break ground next spring. Hinge Homes could break ground next spring at 125 Charlotte Street if it secures state funding to complete its land purchase from the city. The City of Rochester chose Hinge Homes after a competitive request for proposals process that drew 4 responses. It will lead the project in partnership with the Housing Council at Pathstone, development consultant Patrick Tobin, LLC, and CJS Architects. The project is scheduled to be completed in 2028, pending final approval of the sale to Hinge Neighbors next spring. The sale is contingent on funding from Homes and Community Renewal's Block by Block program, says Sean Dunwoody, Executive Director of Hinge Neighbors, a nonprofit launched in 2018 in an effort to bring community voice to development. Hinge Homes, an offshoot of Hinge Neighbors, aims to expand affordable home ownership opportunities by constructing 11 townhomes, 9 of which would feature fully accessible ground floor accessory dwelling units. The development is expected to house 20 families. Each home offers a stoop or a porch. The block-by-block funding would cover $4.2 million of the project's estimated cost of $6.85 million. Hinge Homes is securing construction loans through the U.S. Treasury Department's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund to be paid with $1.7 million in anticipated proceeds from the sale of the units. Other funding will be raised with grants from the Rochester community. Dunwoody describes the project as a natural extension of Hinge Neighbors, which he runs with Suzanne Mayer to connect and amplify residents' voices on area development. Dunwoody says, part of what Hinge has been doing has been working with neighbors on either side of the inner loop to create a neighborhood or a land use plan. In that, we listened to neighbors, and they stated that they wanted affordable home ownership. Created in 2017 as part of the city's Inner Loop East project, the 125 Charlotte Street parcel has always been slated for development, the city says. It was originally intended to be part of a larger mixed-use residential complex that included a parking garage. Proposals for the parcel over the years have also included a daycare facility and headquarters for a local small business. The parcel is the only undeveloped land in the inner loop. which saw massive redevelopment in the early 2000s. In September, as Dunwoody began looking for land, the City of Rochester issued a request for proposals for the parcel at 125 Charlotte Street. In the meantime, community members in the surrounding neighborhoods used the parcel as a shared green space. Some of them protested plans to develop the land, arguing that it serves as the area's only green space and should instead be turned into a public park. Keep East End Green, a group of those opposed to the development, contest Hinge Homes' claim that its project will retain 40% of the parcel as green space. They support more affordable housing in the area, but not at the cost of green space. The group says healing inner loop damage means building back thoughtfully, not repeating the same mistake of sacrificing green space for development. The nearest public spaces to 125 Charlotte Street are Anderson Park, about a quarter-mile away, and Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Park, roughly a half a mile from the parcel. Dunwoody says that opposition to the project stemmed from a lack of understanding. The Hinge proposal includes publicly accessible green space along Pitkin Street, 9 parking spaces, and additional green space at the center of the property. That's from city documents. Dunwoody says there was some initial pushback because people didn't know what was going to be developed. So, since they heard it was going to be developed, they said, no, let's keep this green space, even though community members were told it was always going to be developed. Dunwoody says it has been an uphill battle with residents opposed to the development, noting that Hinge Neighbors is not a large developer, but a nonprofit that works with the community. Despite pressure from some neighborhood residents, on April 21st, City Council approved the sale of 125 Charlotte Street to Hinge for $150,000 in a 7-2 vote, with council members Mary Lupine and Stanley Martin voting against. Dunwoody says Hinge met with each council member to explain the project's goals. I think what happened was they adopted the no development before they knew what we were developing, he says. The Block by Block program offers nonprofit developers subsidies for small, concentrated new construction infill projects of 1 and 2 family homes in Rochester, Albany, Binghamton, Buffalo, and Syracuse, with the intention of easing the state's housing crisis. A developer can receive up to $300,000 in subsidy for the construction of single-family home and $400,000 for a 2-family home. Recipients of Block by Block funding are required to have experience in affordable housing development and in guiding first-time buyers, earning up to 60% of the area median income through the home buying process. Dunwoody hopes to meet these requirements with the help of his project partners. Hinge's partners include Craig Jensen, an architect with CJS Architects, Patrick Tobin, an affordable housing developer, and real estate developers Mary Tilton and Amy Hecker. Dunwoody says, Hinge doesn't have experience in development, but we have experience in community development, the outreach and marketing portions of that. So, our mission was to assemble an experienced team that could actually support what we've been always driven to do. The project also is pursuing funding from other sources, including bank loans and grants. Dunwoody has spoken with LISC New York, a nonprofit that works with state and local partners on sustainable community development projects, regarding pre-construction and construction loans for the project. Dunwoody discussed Hinge Home's role in reversing the impact of redlining and in diversifying the neighborhood economically and socially. Prior to the revitalization work of the early 2000s, the neighborhood around the 125 Charlotte Street parcel saw little economic or housing development, a legacy of discriminatory practices that had long denied credit and insurance to people of color. Dunwoody says, this becomes a green lining project. One of the key things creating a neighborhood is you're going to have a diversity of home ownership. They'll have the townhomes diagonally right across the street that are $500,000, $550,000, and $600,000. So now you're going to have this diversity of income in home ownership, which is key. Suzanne Mayer, Dunwoody's partner in Hinge, says, the reason we chose this location for the prototype is because building affordable housing units outside of poverty-stricken neighborhoods with the chance of creating wealth generation for those who have missed out is possible. Black and brown long-term homeowners in Rochester are often economically stuck, not just rooted. They own homes that don't build equity, so moving up or out is harder. So we're hoping to break that cycle in Rochester, she notes. Dunwoody says that the Charlotte Street project is just a first step for Hinge. How do we scale up to larger projects, he says? How do we create affordable housing within the Market View Heights neighborhood? He hopes this development project will serve as a prototype. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana, who's a Rochester Beacon contributing writer and a member of the Oasis Project's second cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. And our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Raymond and is dated June 16th. RPO names a new president and CEO. The Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra has named Tanya McBride Robles as its new president and CEO. Robles begins her job on August 17th, succeeding Curtis Long, who has served as the RPO CEO since 2017. Robles' background includes more than 2 decades in leadership roles at important American orchestras and performing arts institutions, including the Nashville and Atlanta Symphony Orchestras and the New England Conservatory. The announcement follows a 3.5-month process involving a nationwide search, hiring an executive research group, forming a search committee of RPO board members and musicians, choosing and interviewing finalists, and making an offer to the leading candidate. It sounds like a typical CEO search, but the RPO, founded more than a century ago, is not a typical organization. The orchestra produces 150 concerts each year, and the CEO's job is a delicate balancing act involving the organization's financial, artistic, and community facets. Robles says, I see my job as being a public spokesperson, a fundraiser, and a cheerleader for the orchestra. To that end, her duties will include close artistic partnerships with the RPO's principal conductors, Andreas Delfs and Jeff Tyzik, and supporting the Voices of Today commissioning and recording program, which began 2 seasons ago and will continue in 26 to 27. Also, maintaining good and creative relations with local arts organizations, and especially the orchestra's neighbor, the University of Rochester's Eastman School of Music. Her duties will also include creating and maintaining relationships with current and potential donors and completing the orchestra's current $50 million plus comprehensive campaign, which not only supports the endowment and education and community education programs, but also secures the orchestra's long-term stability. Robles credits a good part of her success in Nashville and Atlanta to connecting with their local arts communities, and she is similarly planning to get to know Rochester and its artists, she says, meeting the members of this community where they are. Every community is unique, and listening to the community is critical. Her ability to listen gave her an extensive and successful track record of labor relations in Nashville and Atlanta, forecasting a smooth relationship with the RPO's musicians and the American Federation of Musicians. There's more to Robles' resume than those successful positions in Nashville, Atlanta, and Boston. She was trained as a singer at Baltimore's Peabody Conservatory, but she says that her turning point occurred during a summer internship with the Baltimore Arts Organization. That, she says, was a light bulb moment. I started out as a performer, but more and more I realized that I had an ops brain instead. I was interested in all the behind-the-scenes work, and I developed a real respect and understanding for that. She has not completely given up performing and still enjoys choral singing. Robles has a master's degree in public administration from the University of Maryland Global Campus and is a graduate of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency's Joint Military Attaché School. She accompanied her husband, a U.S. naval officer, on assignments in Spain, Bahrain, Japan, and Ecuador. International experiences that Robles says have shaped her leadership philosophy. Orchestras are, like everybody else, still adapting to a post-pandemic and increasingly digital world. During the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, Robles was Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Baltimore Symphony. She remembers, overnight we had to create a new normal, but I found it liberating, an opportunity to innovate. The Baltimore Symphony had zero digital content, no streaming at all, so we had to figure out how to create it quickly. With the help of a generous BSO donor, she hired a non-musical documentary crew to create 30 digital episodes featuring individual members of the orchestra navigating the pandemic at home, showing them in interviews, playing, and in the case of an orchestra oboist, even making reeds. Robles admits, "You'd say this was an ambitious project or a really bad idea, but the risk paid off. The videos were a powerful tool. They humanized the musicians and even led to some additional income for the orchestra." In Baltimore, she also invited pop musicians to collaborate with the BSO and appointed rapper and activist Wordsmith as the orchestra's first artistic partner. No new normals are needed in Rochester, Robles thinks, just continuing and improving a good thing. The organization does so many things right, she says. The orchestra's conductors and musicians are extraordinary, and it has a talented, smart board whose members realize the necessity for fiscal responsibility. Robles believes the orchestra is well positioned for more growth. I think it's an exciting time to be leading the RPO, she says. Thanks to Kurt and the board, the orchestra is in very strong shape and ending a very successful capital campaign. There's really nothing that needs fixing. I see my job as building on the RPO's success for the past 100 years, continuing George Eastman's original commitment to the Rochester community, but from a 21st century perspective. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer David Raymond, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Rob Bell and is dated June 18th. A different model of care. Michael Mendoza, MD, says the Rochester region's health has not fully recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. Cardiovascular measures, maternal and child health, immunizations, and blood pressure control are still a challenge, he said. The biggest challenge that hasn't gotten better, and in some cases has gotten worse, is the disparity in blood pressure control between black and brown populations and the white populations, and that's not okay. Mendoza, former Monroe County Commissioner of Public Health, and the face of the county's response to the pandemic, is now Senior Medical Director at Town Square Health, a Chicago-based company planning to open its debut health center in Rochester around September. The site is expected to be near Westfall and Clinton and Brighton, close to a complex already used by many residents for medical care. It will focus on Medicare patients, including adults 65 and older, and some younger patients who qualify for Medicare because of disability. For Mendoza, the aim is not simply to open another primary care office. It is to test whether a different model of care can help prevent declines in health before patients reach a crisis point. I'm going to want to know that people are healthier, Mendoza says. Are they living longer and healthier lives? Town Square Health uses a value-based multi-specialty care model for Medicare patients it calls Primary Care 3.0, a concierge-style experience. Under the traditional fee-for-service model, doctors and health systems are generally paid based on the number of visits, services, and procedures they provide. A value-based model ties payment more closely to patient outcomes. David Buchanan, CEO and co-founder of Town Square Health, says, "Part of the reason we can spend more time with patients and be more thorough is because we get paid when the patients do well and not just when we see a lot of them." Buchanan, a Western Pennsylvania native, says Rochester appealed to him both because of the market and because the city felt familiar. "When I first came to Rochester, it felt like coming home," he says. "I feel like Pittsburgh and Rochester really have a lot of similar histories, and you can see it even in the infrastructure and the houses and the community." Buchanan says Town Square Health may open more locations throughout Western New York, but right now we're laser focused on the Rochester area. He co-founded the company in 2025 after leadership roles at Oak Street Health and CVS Health. CVS Health acquired Oak Street Health in 2023, adding a primary care network focused on value-based care for older adults and Medicare patients. According to Buchanan's LinkedIn profile, he served as Oak Street's Chief Clinical Officer, Chief Clinical and Technology Officer, and Executive Medical Director before later working as Chief Innovation Officer for Healthcare Delivery at CVS Health. David and I have known each other for a while, says Mendoza, who grew up in Chicago and later moved to Rochester, where he has worked as a family physician, a public health commissioner, and a healthcare executive. The two doctors reconnected as Buchanan was looking to build local relationships. His commitment to prevention and community health is a perfect reflection of our Primary Care 3.0 vision, Buchanan said, after announcing Mendoza's new role. The doctors say Town Square Health's model reflects what many clinicians want from their work, the ability to put quality first. There's this element of being a physician that's like a craftsperson, Buchanan says. You're really trying to take the best care of individual patients. Still, value-based care is not without concerns. While the model is designed to reward better outcomes rather than more visits, critics have raised questions about whether it can create new pressures on providers and patients. Practices often need to invest heavily in technology, data systems, and reporting tools to track quality measures. Town Square Health says it plans to use Heidi, an AI note-taking tool, during visits to reduce administrative work. Buchanan said the tool is meant to help keep doctors from staring at their laptops and typing instead of looking at patients and listening. Patients who are uncomfortable with AI will be able to opt out. The idea is that ambient documentation tools could transcribe clinical visits and generate draft notes. Automated scheduling and patient reminders would reduce no-shows and minimize staff time on phone calls. Additional applications could include prior authorization tools to expedite insurance approvals and AI-supported triage and chat functions to address routine questions. AI could also reduce physician burnout. About 42% of U.S. physicians report burnout symptoms, according to a survey administered by the American Medical Association. The figure is down from a 62.8% post-pandemic. However, even with that decline, physicians remain significantly more likely to experience burnout than workers in other fields, adding to concerns about whether the healthcare system can retain enough clinicians to meet rising demand. There's also the question of how value is measured, and whether this model could create unintended consequences. For example, providers may have a financial incentive to limit referrals or order fewer tests to control costs and increase margins. That raises concerns about whether some patients could end up receiving less care than they need. In an Instagram post, Town Square Health says its model, in addition to improving the health of aging adults, will deliver returns for our investors. The initial Rochester team is expected to include providers, nurses, a practice manager, and patient navigators. Over the next 5 to 10 years, Buchanan says, the goal is to expand beyond the first Brighton area center. He says success could mean serving about 20,000 patients across 3 or 4 centers in the Rochester area. For Mendoza, the measure will be whether the model improves health outcomes in a region where older adults face growing needs and where post-pandemic inequities persist. There is a demand for a different way of doing care for a lot of people, Mendoza says. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Rob Bell, who's a Beacon contributing writer and a former Democrat and Chronicle reporter, photographer, and editor. He also produces and hosts Plants and Beats, a podcast exploring mindfulness, music, and culture. And you've been listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. My name is Jan Heineman, and I hope you enjoyed our readings from the Rochester Beacon today, and I hope that you can come back in the future to listen again.